Thank you, Victor. Canon Corrado, it's a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you for taking time out of your day and take that you are fortified once again to be on Zoom. I know we're all reaching a level of fatigue at one point or another, so I certainly am grateful for you taking the time to be here. So we're going to jump right in with my slides, and let me just start it up. So tonight we're going to focus on the Book of Ezra from the Old Testament, and the title of the program, the talk that we're going to have, the discussion, is Rebuilding the Emotions of a Community, and we're going to draw some lessons from Ezra as we go through each of these topics. And I hope that you will find it interesting, of course, and that you will, we're a good-sized group, so perhaps if you want to put some questions in the chat as we go along, or we will have time specifically to have discussion, and I think we can move things. We'll be mindful of the time, but I think it's important for all of us to have some input on some of this. So here's our plan for the day: is we're going to move through most of the Book of Ezra, and just by hitting these different passages as we go. So here's a little background. The 6th century BCE, or BC as we used to call it. The Israelites are, for the most of them are off in Babylon in exile. They have been taken away and relocated as to live as slaves, as subjects of the king of Babylon. We're in the sequence of history. We are at the end of what we would call the historical narrative of the Old Testament. Now, the Book of Ezra and its following book is the Book of Nehemiah, and those come at they actually come right after 2nd Chronicles. But the history, that's what I'm talking about, is the historical narrative through history of time is finished off there, and then we'll pick up for us as Christians in the apocryphal texts before the New Testament. So you get a sense of where we're going. We're going to land in about the time 538, 39, and what has happened is that the Judites, though they're in Babylon and in Susa, this Yahweh, as he's called in the Old Testament, stirs the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, and in that he feels God's presence to have the Israelites return to their homeland, and permits the Judites to return. In fact, he will give them gifts and gold and material for them to restore Jerusalem and the temple, and to repopulate the villages and towns around that area, which are known as the area of Judah. So the impact of what's happening is both socially, the changes are socially, religiously, and physically. People this is a wide sweeping change that's going to happen for the Jewish people as they return. And though they return, and joyfully they do run into opponents that try to stop their work. At the heart of it, and why read the Book of Ezra? It's a story of God's involvement with his people, and his people at this point are the Jewish people, the Israelites as well, really the Judites, right? At this time, we'll save you all the fine historical details, but the Jews, the Judites returning to Jerusalem, to the temple area. So the question I have for us is, we're going to start, and for you to consider and keep with you as we go through this, is, does this sense of returning from exile hold true for Christians? And how can this story help us today? So let's jump into this. I'm going to be moving the screens around a little bit so I can see everybody. Whoops. Let me go back. I'm going to go back. Here we go. Okay. So first, Yahweh moved is in the first verse, and it reads, in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in order that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be proclaimed, the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia, so that he sent a herald throughout his kingdom. And the herald goes and proclaims that the Judites may return. So here we have a reminder that God's involvement in the world is expansive. It's not just limited to the temple. It's not just limited to Jerusalem, the holy mountain or holy hill. It's not just limited to the Jewish people, but God can work in surprising ways and in moving the powers that be, the king of Cyrus, the king of Persia himself. So, and God works with unexpected people. So one of the questions, and we'll just kick it around and see if some folks want to answer this for a minute, is how have you seen God at work in surprising ways recently? I think this is a wonderful thing for us to start with and to think about. So if someone would like to, maybe have a couple people give that answer. How have you seen God at work? I know we're good Episcopalians, but we have all seen God at work. But we haven't been our churches. Bob, we haven't seen him at work. So yes, you have. So what ways, where have you seen God working in your own life?
I can say something.
Great. Cindy, go ahead. Thank you.
I feel like the craziness of COVID has allowed us to deepen our spirituality, deepen our connections, all through Zoom. So I feel like God has been working through Zoom, a very unexpected place.
How would you, could you give us an example of what that sounds like or feels like?
You mean?
Can you give us a bit of an example? You said God's working in Zoom, deepening spirituality and your connection. Can you tell us?
Yeah, like in my parish, we have now morning prayer every day with up to 40 people, Compline every day with about 35 people,
right,
who never got together before, and we've been praying daily together for 18 months.
That's
and
beautiful.
So we've gotten to know each other, praying for each other. Connections are being made with people all over the country, and it's just, and people's prayers are changing. I think that's something I've noticed, that people's prayers are changing and they're much more inclusive and expansive.
Nice.
Your words.
Nice. That's beautiful. How about one more example like that? If someone has something, how's God worked with you?
Well, I'll share. I don't know if we call this surprising, but I'm loving spring and the beautiful colors, and that reminds me of God, and all of the fact that we're getting news that we can unmask in public, and the fact that, and maybe that's not surprising, we knew it would happen someday, but it is certainly a relief to know things are getting a little looser. While we've used Zoom to connect throughout this closed-in time, it is wonderful to see kind of a new beginning as we start coming outside our houses as things get better.
That's beautiful. I think that'll be a great segue. Thank you, Laura, for us as we move forward. And keep that in mind. So God's actions. Here, reading from chapter 1, verse 5. I'm just going to move us around. I'm like changing where I can see you all. So, okay. The heads of the family of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred, got up to go up and rebuild the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. And from the commentary that I used, here's this quote: the mechanisms and means of redemption are explained interestingly and importantly, I think, for us even today, not in economic, not in social, not in political terms, but in spiritual ones. It is God who stirs the spirits of both the powers of this earth and his people into action, and he does so for one purpose, so that worship of him may be restored. So some interesting threads that we can pull out of this. Notice that everyone whose spirit God had stirred up, they were also spiritually encouraged. They received spiritual encouragement for the return. But not everybody's spirit was turned. Not everybody returned, interestingly enough. Some chose not to return. Life was pretty good where they were, they felt. And then others, interestingly enough, physically couldn't. Perhaps because of age, or they were too old or too young to make the trip of many miles. And so my question for you, and the question for us to consider as we go through this evening, is have you considered who might not return to church and why? Yeah, go ahead, Tam.
Yeah, this is a big question for us because we have a lot of older parishioners who have been participating because we have online services, and it's very difficult for them to get out. And so and also people who are very far away, who moved away, or whose parents went to our church and they found us. So I got people in Spain and Germany, and they're connecting with us every week, every day, every week. And so we have to figure out how to keep that going while we're returning to in person. So that's a problem. We're a real small church, so it's a struggle.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good to point out. And it's exactly one of the things that the churches, I think, are running into. Is there another example? Does someone else feel like they would add?
I guess I'll go again. Go ahead.
Is that Scott?
How do you, I'm not too good at this.
Oh, Lynn, go ahead. There
Thank
you
you
are.
very much.
Yeah.
I think our concern is how do you get the children back to church? Sunday school has just about disintegrated, and to get people interested in even being involved in building it up again we're finding it very difficult and don't know where to go and how to do this.
That's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. And one last thought, or anyone else? Because I know we had two people kind of.
Well, I spoke, but I did speak before, but I'll real quick say, I think to some degree, people have gotten used to Zoom. Some people maybe even prefer it. And there's also a nervousness so far to coming back out. Some people I know aren't going to come back out because they're still nervous of COVID.
Right. And so it's interesting, right? And so let's see how Ezra plays that out, because I think those are all really good concerns. So in chapter 3, verse 3, the subject is really around fear and anxiety. So the Judites, as they returned, they set up the altar on its foundation because they were in dread of the neighboring people, and offered burnt offerings upon it to the Lord morning and evening. Now, here's what the commentator I thought is helpful around this. Most strikingly of all is the writer's insistence that the return first recorded the response to the fear of the people, right, was to prepare for and recommence their worship of God. Prophecies around this time, you can look at Hagar, were keen to prescribe cultic restoration as a reassurance of God's presence and as an antidote to society, to anxiety. So in this case, for them, and that I'm not going to sweep aside anxiety as some, just after a prayer to God and everything's going to be fine. But in this case, for them, it relieved their fears as they returned back, but were afraid of the neighboring peoples that they encountered as they returned. they began to worship God as the focus, and to focus on that as a means of contextualizing and framing out their fears. So my question for you, and for you to consider with your church, is if they haven't, how have your people, and your people is your congregation, expressed their fears? Or maybe they haven't, or haven't considered this. And if not, how can you use restoration of worship as a sign of God's reassuring presence? And the caveat I'll put into that is that, and I was talking with Canon Corrado before this, is I have this, I follow a lot of churches on Instagram. I'm a priest, it shouldn't be a surprise, right? So so I have this this photo. This is a posting from a church. I'm going to hide the name of the church. I don't want to get them in trouble purposely. But if you can see this, you can see that there's a bunch of, it says, "Come home," right, in all caps. And there's a whole bunch of groups of young people standing behind it, and they're jumping up and down in celebration. And none of them have masks on. What is that, right? And so there's a church that is just, the people whoever put that together thought, you know what, everybody just wants to be back together. But the question is that not everybody feels it's safe yet, right? And so how can we, as the people of God, what can we do to help people express their fears? And I think naming it and acknowledging and expressing are fundamental first steps of finding your way through the anxiety. And I think that's important piece here. If you follow along with this, they set up the altar on its foundation because they were in dread, okay? That they understood how they felt. So I think to allow the celebratory feelings of getting back are important, but also to be able to express those fears. Anybody want to add a thought here before I move to the next slide?
I don't.
Nope, I lost you. Lynn, we lost you back to mute.
Oh,
do it
I'm
again.
sorry.
There you go.
My hand's faster than my brain. We have had services, and we started services a few months ago where only 1 or 2 people came, but we still did the services.
Yeah.
And then when Easter came, we actually had 39 people show up, which to us was a crowd, okay? Because we don't have a big congregation anyway. Last Sunday, that dwindled down to something like 16 people, okay? So there are people that are still not afraid, but we do have people that are still fearful. And we have all the things in place to be able to have them come and safely. So
right.
And we've tried to reach out to them, sending them this information and sharing it with them.
Right.
We're going to move to outside probably in a week or two when it gets a little bit warmer. And I think I'm hoping then we'll see more people. But I don't know that the people trust the government, trust the CDC, or even trust the church. So even though we believe we've been doing it, that it's very safe and everything is in place, it's still hard to get them there because some were just terrified.
And so what I would say is, as we point to Ezra, is the acknowledgement of the fear is helpful, and the acknowledgement of the anxiety is helpful. Is to say to people, yes, we're doing everything correctly, and we understand that may not be enough. And one of the ways to kind of say it's enough, is to acknowledge, hey, we've all been locked up for, or isolated, right, for a long time. And so how do we do that? How do we feel comfortable with that? So that's good. Let me, and so what I would suggest, one of the things that I've taken from Ezra is, hey, let's look at how we can do our restoring, not of saying we're going to get back together as a community and welcome back home to our community, but to that worship our worship is a sign of God's presence in our lives. So let's move on here. Let me just kind of be careful of my time. But okay, so shouts of here's where we have it, right? Shouts of joy mixed with loud weeping is in this verse, these two verses. Let me read them for you. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the family, old people who had seen the first house on its foundations, meaning the first temple, wept with a loud voice when they saw this house. The new house wasn't as nice as the old house. It wasn't as big as the first temple, though many shouted aloud for joy because they were happy to see that there was a temple to turn to, so that the people actually couldn't distinguish the sounds of the joyful shout from the sounds of the people's weeping, for the people shouted so loudly that the sound was heard far away. So that the important point here for this commentator gives us is that the writer's curious insistence on emphasizing the impossibility of differentiating between joy and sadness suggests that the point is less about the particular emotion than the intensity and the volume of their expression and their testimony to the community, meaning that and I would say this is where we can focus on as churches, right, is to give ourselves space and value for all emotions to return, right, and to say we understand you're afraid, or I'm afraid too. Maybe the priest says I'm a little, this is all kind of fearful for me, but right, we worship God and we're going to do that as safely as possible, right? And following all the safety guidelines, because it's important for us to gather as communities to worship God. That's what Ezra would say. That was the experience of the people there. And so the question, and I'll ask the second one for you is, or with the both, either question, right? Is in what ways could your people's expression be a testimony for your parish's community? Meaning, how could it be an expression for your town or village or city that you live in? So let's maybe someone would like to give their thoughts on either one of those questions.
I have a question about about readiness. How do we know that we are ready when we have no guarantee, no credibility, and no sensitivity? Because we have been told that we could not leave, that we are not ready, and we have been taking another direction through Zoom. So right. We are already Zoom bound. We keep our faith, but we don't exactly know if we are ready to start or not. And this is one. And second of all, how do we do with joy and fear, or joy and tremble? We certainly wanted to celebrate, but we need to keep our life safe. So what do we do with the joy, and what do we do with that fear that is not getting away?
Right. Richard, I'm reminded of the end of the first ending of Mark, chapter 16, the first ending of the gospel there, and what the experience of the people at the tomb on Easter morning was two things, right? It was fear, there was this joy, awe, but also fear, right? And so I think it's fair for us to have, and I think it's very real, the emotions that you're expressing. So first off, good for you. And I think that those are challenges. I'm not in a parish at the moment because I'm busily working on a new book, but but I spent as the interim last year at a new church. I was there 8 weeks and we went into lockdown. And then I spent the rest of my time there in that. And I had one thought as a priest, and I bet if you ask I've asked other priests this, is I did not want to have us be responsible for someone being sick, getting COVID. I just didn't want that. And so, and neither did anybody else, to be frank. And so I think you express that. Now, I think we We know of certain things that are okay in terms of gathering and worship, but I do think it's a slow steps that each community makes as they go along. So I would say to you is if you are, and any of you, any churches that you worship at, if your church is not ready to come back in, that's okay. I really honestly do, because you will feel the call. You're still able to worship in a variety of ways, right? Online, and hopefully that works for people. But I also think that it would be helpful to all of our churches, whether it's on Zoom or people sending emails in or something, that the parish leaders give the congregation the opportunity to express their emotions. To say, you know what, this is how I really, really feel. And this is what's going on for me. And I think in the case of your parish and where you are, I think that would be a terrific thing to allow people, that would to me be the first step. I don't think the first step is to send out a come on back, welcome home, we're here. This church also had in the feed for this church on Instagram, they wrote, and we're going to be singing, and I was like, good God, how are they're going to be, the choir is going to be singing, and you're going to be singing your masks, and it's going to be, and I'm like, on what planet are these people? I would never go, but that's where I am. And I think that those the emotions, that the joy that God is still with us, but the loud weeping that things are not the way they were is important. Let me step forward now into the next slide. It says help from those who remained were rebuffed. So when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, now these are people who were living in the area, heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the family and said to them, let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we've been sacrificing to him ever since the day of King Esarhaddon of Assyria, who brought us here. Well, what happened? The Judites said, thanks, but no thanks. We don't need your help. We're going to rebuild this place without you. Well, that set up a series of contention, built up the adversary, and pushed them to actually, they began to write to the king of Babylon and saying, hey, these people you can't trust. But what was interesting, right? The basis of their author is neither ethnicity nor politics, right? They had been brought from Assyria, but they wanted to be on religious solidarity, and their claim is couched in terms of that seem plausible. They're seeking God and wanting to sacrifice to him. So if one church says we're not ready to gather again, and another church says we are, neither are wrong. Or if some people in your congregation say, we're ready to gather, we need to gather, and others say, not yet, right? It's not a question of saying, well, you don't believe the way we believe, which is what a mistake the Judites made, saying, no, you're not the right people here. That was the mistake they did. And so the suggestion here is, and the question I have, is people will return over the course of the coming year. Some are going to be excited like that church that I showed you on Instagram. And others others will come back and be fearful to be near others, and still others may come back for a time. Perhaps what happened, some of the people at Lynn's church, and say, oh, we're going to come back. Okay, that was a little too much for me. Not everybody in that group, but maybe some people said that was a little too much, and they decided to some will decide to stay, and some will decide to wait, and some may leave. So how can you anticipate varied responses that people may have, because I think we're all going to have that, right? What do we think?
I think it's just a given that there are going to be different responses.
Right.
And so that, to me, the problem for us as a small parish is maintaining, I think we need to maintain both.
Mm-hmm.
I think the online services should be here to stay for the people that need them, that can access them whenever they want them. But we also need to be in community, because that's what the church is. So for us, it's a resources. How do we manage to balance that? And how do we do an online service? We do YouTube pre-recorded right now. Right. How do we do that when we're back really in the building?
Right.
You know, the technology is difficult. So
that's big questions. Then the questions will be stuff like this, right? You know, you come back to church and the priest suddenly says, "The peace of the Lord be always with you." You know, maybe also with you. You know, I'm sure you never have a person like this at your church before COVID. Oh, I don't shake hands at the peace, right? Nobody's ever seen that. I mean, I've been in enough interim at 7 different churches. I've been at 10 different parishes in my career. There are people who don't want to give the peace, right? And now they're all going to be like, yeah, I was right, and right. Now I have a really good reason why I don't give the peace, because, you know, forget it, right? Or how about when we say, like this church that I'm picking on tonight, they are like, we're going to sing. Well, I'm not sure if I'm there yet, you know, as a leader of a congregation, even in masks, you know, and what does that look like? And so, but other congregations might be like, you know what, it's fine, or we're going to be outside and it'll be fine, and we're distanced and it's okay. Okay. But not every church can do that, right? Because we're from all over the place, and some in urban churches can't worship outside. So we're going to note that each step of returning back to liturgy, I didn't even get into communion, right, is going to be that step. So in, let me just, I can't see my title here for a second. Okay. So what happens in Ezra, by the time we reach chapter 4, the Israelites have become immobilized. They're these adversaries, have written the king and said this: "Now may it be known to the king that if this city is rebuilt, Jerusalem, and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, toll, and the royal revenue will be reduced." Right? That's a big deal, right? If we go back, let's put it in this terms. If we go back into worship, everybody's going to get sick and we're going to close, right? That's that kind of, and so the answer for them, unfortunately for the Judites, was that they were immobilized by the intimidation, and it felt like intimidation. The community and its building activities were immobilized by the intimidation long before they received an official order to cease and desist. So here's the reminder of what David said to Solomon when he was building the very first temple. "Be strong and of good courage and act. Do not be afraid or dismayed, for Yahweh, God, my God, is with you. He will not fail you or forsake you until all the work for the service of the house of Yahweh is finished." They went back into the reminder of relationship. It wasn't about community. It wasn't about, we need to gather for the sake of gathering. We need to gather for the sake of worshiping God. So people may become frightened again by the virus. And what may happen, right? We could see this happen, is some will look to external information or guidance to change church practices. Hey, the CDC says we can't sing yet. We can't sing, right? Well, what are we going to do at that time? Do we just stop and mobilize? What are the ways that we can do to remember to be focused on the reassuring presence of God, so that we're not immobilized, so that we can return to or reestablish or rebuild our community as a worship community to God. And it'll be different for everyone, but that's my question. So let's open that up. If anybody would like to have a statement there, and give your ideas of opening back up.
My concern is about the location. Where do we found God? Because from the very beginning, God was located in the temple, and then later on, God was moved now to Zoom. So in our way back to church, where do we locate God, that we could be faithful to Him, that we could build a community, and at the same time that we could be a company for one another and build a very strong way of continue doing Jesus' mission?
Right. I think that's thank you again, Richard. I think that's a really good question, right? God came to us over Zoom. I think that's a very fair statement. And I would say that the people, right? We know that the exiled people would turn to the west. The Jews in Babylon would turn to the west to worship toward Jerusalem, even though they weren't in Jerusalem. They continued to worship God, or they continued to worship God where they were in exile. And we know that because if we remember Daniel, in the book of Daniel, or we remember Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, right, in the furnace, and God was there with them, right? Even though those are during the period of exile. So we know that God is not just located in the temple, but we also feel the draw to be people of a parish and to return to that. It's our natural way of being as community and as Episcopalians to want to gather again in that way. So again, I would say is God's presence is not incumbent on where we worship God, right? And that's important for those that are going to stay away from church for whatever reason. And those that have connected to church in ways they hadn't been able to in the past, right? Because now we're much more flexible being on Zoom and on YouTube and Facebook Live and all the things like that. So there's important to emphasize, also to understand that our houses of prayer have power in them that is important for us to remember. So I think it comes down to choice. It's not a requirement to return to church, and it may be at a place where churches say we're going to worship in a new and different way, and not encumbered by a building. And there's nothing, I think, wrong with that either. But again, that's each community's decision as we go forward. So let's move to this next slide here, and so they finished building by the command of God of Israel and by the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and King Artaxerxes of Persia. So it took time for them to do this, and this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. And what I want you to keep in mind here is the date of completion is carefully noted. And to a sense, it fulfills prophecy, as we can see in Jeremiah. What is really interesting and important is for us and for your church's posterity and history is how can we recognize the restoration of worship in our buildings, if that's something we want to do, and when that happens. Because my argument is, and Ezra argues, it's a big deal. It's a big deal for us to move back to our buildings. It's a big deal for that decision to be made. And the people 100 years from now are going to be really interested in to see what we did and want to know how we came up with the decisions that we made, and to acknowledge that in some way. I think it's also important for us to recognize and give space to the loss that has occurred, that the people who have died that we weren't able to be with during the period of COVID, and that we weren't able to mourn or celebrate their lives in the ways that filled us completely, or the celebrations of graduations and confirmations and baptisms and weddings that weren't done the way that we had dreamt of. I would also ask us, what would you say now? What are some of the silver linings that have emerged from the pandemic?
Me again. I don't want to
All
take.
right, Lynn.
I don't want to. I think the fact that we had to slow down, that everybody didn't want to do it in the beginning, but they slowed down, and it gave us an opportunity to explore other avenues, not just in worship, but hobbies, creativity, and to become. I marvel at how the families are, at least I know there's been stress to all of them, but how they're brought together. For me to see a father walking with 3 kids and handling them in the playground, which you didn't see before, because now they are taking an active part in taking care of the kids and being there for them, in spite of the fact that they have a little corner to probably work out of for work at home. So slowing down, finding things that we didn't know we were able to do, or capable of doing. And the other thing for me is, because I am involved in feeding programs and things, to see how people have reached out to the people who are lonely, who do need help, and reach out to them. So there's always some good that comes out of these terrible things that happen to us. And I don't care what the disaster is, the goodness of humanity of people just comes forward. And we know we're going to get over this, because we are God's children, and we know we're going to be fine. But it's helping people to feel that and to experience it. And as you said, we have to listen to the people who are fearful, listen to them who are anxious. But when we opened up, we have music, but we don't sing. But they never sang before anyway. I mean, really, they didn't do much singing. So what we said to them, you can, wear your mask, you can hum, clap your hands, stamp your feet, do whatever it is that helps you to praise. So, and it works, it does work. So
Good.
I don't want to go on about it, but there is good, and there is good.
Good.
We have Susan, and then we have Laura.
Okay, great. You go ahead.
I would like to echo what Lynn said. A couple of things that, certainly in our church, and Tam, who had been speaking earlier, we're sister parishes. So we've been worshiping together online, and we've been having outdoor communion. And we do have a much older population. I'm 60 something, and I'm the youth group. So the thing that's
your youth group is what, in their 40s?
Yeah, no. I'm 60 something. So
well, maybe these days a youth group is in their 40s. Hey.
No, our youth group is in the 40s. The other church, we have the 40s.
You guys are the 40s. I'm the quote baby of the group. Anyway, what I wanted to say was that one of the things that happened was our priest, who just retired, Cooper, couldn't make the same kinds of pastoral visits that she used to. And parishioners stepped in. And it was true for Tam with the Trinity as well, where people were making phone calls and checking in, especially on the ones that didn't typically raise their hand and say, I need help, or I'm frightened. And I think that really, despite the fact that we're not seeing each other weekly, other than on Zoom, I think it really strengthened some bonds. And that was a blessing. The other part of things that I think have come out of this, to echo what Lynn was saying, is Tam and I are both on the board of the local food pantry, and I've been running the in-person distribution on Tuesdays. And all of a sudden, it's like all of these people came forward, and we, set up everything to be socially distant and all of that stuff. But we've had people really dedicated, and even though we've moved on through this pandemic, they keep coming. They keep coming. I'll pack on Monday. I'll do this. I'll carry the bags. And what what was clear to me was that there was this pent up need to acknowledge and to help others. That all of a sudden you're out of your own bubble of getting on the train and going to the city and working and doing all the things. Suddenly they're home and they can look around and consider, you know what, this is terrible, but I'm so much better off. And people have been able to act on that. And I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
There was someone else who wanted to speak. I didn't. Oh, okay, Terry.
Can you unmute? Yeah, you're unmuted.
Or Wes, I'm not sure.
It doesn't make any difference. The one thing that is a silver lining, I think, for all of us is trust. If we trust one another, we can get a lot more done, and we can be understanding of those who are fearful and those who are not, because the ones who are not fearful may need more guidance than those who are. But the other trust comes from working with your priest. The priest is keeping up with what the diocese has to offer and what the diocese is teaching us about what we can do. And our priest is very good about keeping right on top of that if we listen.
Good. Nice.
And the trust factor is very important. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Eric asked, does anyone know what worship looked like in 1918? You know, for any of the wardens and vestries, I would say you have your history books. You should, you can look in there. At least the service registers, if you haven't had a fire in the last 100 years, they should all be there, and have copies of them, so you might be able to find that. I did take a look at some of the newspapers from the time around that time, and the number of deaths. They had oversized newspapers at the time, and way down on the bottom of the front page, on a very small corner, was the recorded number of deaths in that town. Everything else was about the return home from World War I, and everything being kind of coming, all those folks and servicemen coming back from Europe. That was the focus, certainly at that Christmas time. So, but I would say, and it would be interesting, is to take a look at your history books. It should have. It's what will be surprising is that you'll find that it was not a big highlight in comparison to the buildings that went on in the 50s and 60s. But it's in there. It might be interesting for you all to find out. So I have one last slide here. Let's see. And I'm going to move some things out of the way. So community building is at the heart of Book of Ezra, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The single narrative both books portrays restoration and reformation of God's covenant community. Think about it as the covenant community, not necessarily as a singular place, in its ideals and its continuing fallibility. They didn't always get it right. The returning exiles knew, but they knew precisely who they were, so that they lived out in the land for 2 generations. So that they were exiled, right? That only the very oldest had memory of the original temple. Still, they knew who they were and who they belonged to. Right? Whose are you? That's that question to ask. At the bottom line, you're not your building, you're not just your community, but you're God's children. And so they were able to claim authentic membership in the restored people of God. And I think that that's helpful for all of us as we consider our options and what we have to do and face the challenges we face as we return as a community, communities of worship. Is whose are we, and how can we be single-minded about that and what that means? And so, that is my prepared remarks. I'm gonna there's everything you need to know about me. I will be doing some guest preaching, depending on how quickly I write my manuscript, but I've scheduled some parish retreats and forums with folks, and then I've also can do vestry retreats. So just know that I'm as one of the more experienced interims, I'm kind of used to those kind of things. But my latest book is Courage to Thrive. It's a mental health spiritual exercise journal, 40 different exercises, which include verses from the Bible, some reflections, and a prayer at the end of each one, and then a prompt for you to work on, things to work on. People who are in the midst of some serious mental health struggles have found the book helpful, and others who want to know better about what people face have found it as helpful. If you go to my website and order it there, I'll send you a signed copy. If not, you can go through Amazon, and you can also contact me at Growing a Soul at my Gmail account. So I want to thank you, but I think we still have a minute or two. If there are some last questions or thoughts, and then maybe if someone would like to share any thoughts they haven't had a chance to, then maybe we'll finish with Canon Corrado with a prayer. So any closing thoughts or anything that's on someone's heart that you haven't spoken about yet?
I'm grateful that you reminded us that we have to invite people to tell us how they feel. Mm-hmm. That I don't think that we think about that, and we have to come up with ways that they'll be willing to participate, or just talk about it. Have a Zoom. Just how do you feel about coming back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if it's too much to have someone contact the priest or vestry members, or designate somebody, or as you're making pastoral calls, that's right. Important. I mean, we're Episcopalians. We don't talk about our feelings, right? Some of us. So, but as the Irish kid that came over to the Episcopal Church, right? I know about this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Reverend Dr. Flanagan, I think something that is occurring in this Zoom meeting is the blessing of lay ministry in the church. Throughout the pandemic, there have been a lot of you lay leaders here present today that have taken on the responsibility of keeping your churches moving and keeping your churches open to those ones in need. And the church is grateful for all of that. I think there's a blessing in what you have done that you continue to do. And that ministry of presence and service that you have offered to all of us. So we are grateful for that, and for everyone, lay and ordained ministry. This has been a time where we have been invited to do things together and to invite each other to deeper understanding of God and ourselves as communities of faith. So thank you for your ministry and of presence and service to the whole church, the whole community as well. And to you, Dr. Flanagan, thank you for the time. As again, you're always timely in bringing something new to us in the diocese. And we'll continue. We are going to have 2 other conversations with you next month. Again, next month is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we are going to dive deeper into this topic in some other conversations that we are going to have here. But with Dr. Flanagan, we are going to be on May 18th and May 20th. May 20th will be from 6 to 7 p.m. again, and we are going to be communicating the topic and all that. So thank you for your participation today. And thank you, Reverend Dr. Flanagan, for your presence and gift to this diocese here with us. So thank you.
God bless you all. You are God's children, and through all of this. And I'll just say to throw out for the next time, if you want to have someone else come on or that kind of, we're going to talk about purity and cleanliness as a spiritual sense of how do we gather in that sense. And the Bible talks a lot about kind of clean and unclean, and what does that mean? And we're going to look at that in relationship to our own worship and how we can offer that up as ourselves and be in that place that is so very important of acknowledging and finding our way.
Thank you. Yeah. And Lynn, I would like to invite you, Werdo, if you can bless us before we depart.
Yes, I will. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Most gracious God, we are so thankful for this opportunity to hear the work that you have done through Ezra and for all your prophets. We are grateful all of the people who reach out to others in this time of distress and worry and anxiety. And we are grateful for all that you have blessed us with in this time. And we ask you that you would continue to open our hearts, open our minds to know you, to be with you, and to invite you in, and that we might reach out and do the work you have called us to do. We ask it all in Jesus' name, and may we all return safely to our homes. Take off your mask. You're there already. God bless you. Thank you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, and have a blessed rest of the day today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.